I wake to the hiss of pipes, the low thrum of machinery vibrating through the deck plates beneath my bare feet. The corridors of the warship breathe like lungs, metallic and oppressive, expanding and contracting with the endless pulse of the engines. Red lights flicker along the veins of conduits overhead, casting shadows that twist like reaching fingers. Every breath tastes of iron and ash. Every inhale brings the stench of charred flesh and the faint sweetness of something human, the walls whisper. Not voices as I know them, but vibrations that scrape at the edges of my mind. A syllable here, a sigh there. The ship remembers. It remembers every scream, every fracture of bone, every molten drop that slid into its engines. And it hungers. Always. I am one among thousands of slaves, but in this vast cathedral of metal and warp screech, individuality is a lie. Names are burned, faces are blurred, memories corroded by the routine. I am function. I am repetition. I am the pulse that feeds the ship, the hand that keeps the engines warm with living heat. The corridors stretch infinitely. Around me others shuffle like shadows, limbs too long, eyes hollowed, voices muted. Some chant fragments of prayers I do not recognize. Others mutter to the walls as if they could answer. The ship thrums beneath us, alive and aware. The smell of warp fire coils through the air, and behind it the lingering taste of blood. The mixture is intoxicating, nauseating, addictive. A sudden clang echoes down the deck. Another slave falters, dragging a crate of what? The engines demand it. I do not look. I cannot. My function is to move, to obey, to endure. Every step brings me closer to the heart of the ship, deeper into its hunger, deeper into its whispers. The light flickers again. The shadows stretch. The walls exhale. Somewhere a voice, half human, half machine, calls out, reciting names I do not remember. My name? Does it matter? I am already a ghost, already melted into the rhythm of this vessel, a note in its endless, grinding symphony. And yet, even as despair seeps into my bones, a tiny spark ignites. Curiosity. What lies beyond the next bulkhead? What screams have not yet been answered? The ship pulses beneath my feet, impatient, aware. It hungers, and I am part of the meal it prepares. The day begins with the same ritual, though time here is meaningless. Shift bells do not ring. The engines mark the hours with low hums and metallic groans. I rise from the cold deck plates, joints stiff, skin slick with grime, and I join the others. Our hands move before our minds do. Scrub, scrape, kneel, repeat. The ship does not care if we live or die, only that we function. Blood is everywhere. Not just the new, bright, screaming blood of the condemned, but the darker, fermented stains from those long absorbed by the engines. It smells of iron, decay, and something sweet beneath it all, the sweetness of inevitability. I wipe my hands on my tattered coveralls, not for cleanliness, but for rhythm. The ritual demands it. Machines whir. Soot falls from vents in soft sheets. Conveyor belts move bodies like cargo, the flesh warm and pliable under gloved hands. Some slaves mutter prayers to gods long dead. Others whisper to the engines themselves, feeding them with superstition and fear. I do neither. My hands are empty of thought. My mind is a blank slate, filled only with movement, with efficiency. Overseer servitors pass by, their faces a fusion of metal and gristle. Half demon, half machine, entirely indifferent. They chant their punishments in cadence: kneel, cleanse, serve, obey. Our voices join them, a chorus stripped of inflection, stripped of individuality. I do not remember when I learned to follow without thought, only that it is necessary to survive. Resistance is a concept I cannot afford. Lunch is a cycle, not a meal. Nutrient paste, thick and metallic, slid into our mouths mechanically. No taste remains, only sustenance. Our hunger is not hunger, it is function. My body moves on autopilot, feeding the engines, repairing piping, disposing of scraps. Every task, every motion, every breath is part of the unbroken rhythm. The ship hums approval, and I feel a sliver of contentment, if it could be called that. The corridors fold into each other, endless loops of metal and shadow. I see the same faces, twisted in fatigue, masks streaked with grime, eyes glazed with repetition. Some slump into the walls, collapsed into the machinery. Some stare at nothing, whispering to ghosts no one else can hear. And still we move. Scrub, scrape, kneel, repeat. A clanging echo reminds me, bodies must be disposed of. Limbs severed, organs fed to the engines, souls evaporating in the warp currents the ship exhales. I do it without thought. The machinery guides my hands, the rhythm guides my mind. I am a component in a system older than I can comprehend. I am nothing, but I endure. Somewhere in a corner where shadows pool, I hear laughter. Not human, not sane, just vibrations that scrape against memory. I glance. A slave lifts a tray of fresh biomass, grinning, eyes bright with fever. The overseer notices nothing. Routine continues. The grinding never ends. The work is infinite. The ship consumes, and we serve. The voice comes from above, distorted through metal and vox amplifiers, a timbre that feels alive yet hollow, as if it can peer into your very thoughts. The overseer's chant begins before I can fully register it, each syllable scraping against the inside of my skull. Kneel, serve, obey. The flesh obeys the engine. The soul obeys the hand. Obey, we repeat, not because we understand, not because we consent, but because refusal is unthinkable. Our tongues move in synchrony, reciting punishments for sins we have not committed. The overseer, a twisted fusion of half demon and half machine, watches from a catwalk, wires pulsing along his limbs like veins carrying molten command. His eyes shine with something more than observation, something predatory, calculating, ancient. I remember my name once, a sound I could whisper without fear. Now it tastes foreign like ash on my tongue. Each repetition of the chant erodes the memory further. I am nothing. I am hands, I am arms, I am the machine that serves the machine. The other slaves echo my silence with the noise of submission, their identities burning away with each verse. A fragment of dialogue drifts through the hall, short and ragged. Do you still remember? Do not speak, only obey. Even speech becomes a luxury, an indulgence. We speak in cadence now, in ritual. Individuality is a hazard. Thought is a hazard. Survival is obedience. I glance at Trick, a boy I once trained in proper lifting techniques, now a hollow-eyed automaton. His lips move, mouthing the chant perfectly, yet his eyes flicker, a spark of something unnameable, almost human, almost alive. The overseer's presence doesn't frighten him. It compels him, bends him into service with mechanical precision. I feel a twinge of envy for such submission. The walls reverberate with the chants. The floor vibrates beneath our synchronized motion. The smell of iron and sweat mingles with something darker, almost organic, a metallic hunger that the ship exhales through the vents. I catch fragments in the whispering currents, voices not our own, a chorus layered beneath the overseers. They do not speak to us, they speak through us. I scrape the decks mechanically. I kneel mechanically. I repeat mechanically. Each movement is an echo of a memory I no longer own, a name I no longer carry. The overseer smiles, wires in his jaw twitching, the voice relentless. Obey, obey, obey. I whisper to myself, barely audible, a habit from the days before I became nothing. My name was something. The words vanish instantly, devoured by the rhythm, consumed by the chanting, swallowed by the machinery. I am a ghost in my own flesh. I am a component, and still I endure. The smell hits first. Not blood, not rust, not even death alone. It is all of them together, mixed with something living, writhing, protesting. I stand before the intake hatch, the mouths of the engines yawning like gaping throats. The biomass conveyor shudders beneath my boots. carrying what was once human, now nothing more than trembling, screaming matter. The overseer's voice echoes faintly above the mechanical chorus. Feed, sustain, serve. Life is fuel. Obedience is life. I place my hands on the pulsing mass and they jerk, almost alive beneath my grip. The screams, muffled by vats of acid and the hum of machinery, rise and fall in a rhythm that matches the ship's own heartbeat. I wonder sometimes if the ship notices me. Perhaps it does, not as a person but as part of the engine, a pulse within its consciousness. The hull groans under stress, and the pipes shiver like tendons. It hungers. I feel it through every movement, every vibration, every surge of heat. One of the bodies writhes more than the others. The eyes, wide and panicked, seem to track me, begging for mercy I cannot give. My hands move mechanically, spreading, tearing, shoving it into the waiting maw of the engine. The flesh sizzles, dissolves, screams echoing into the iron throat. And yet I do not flinch, I cannot. To flinch is to stop, and to stop is to die. A whisper coils around my skull. Do you serve or do you consume? I know it is not a human voice. It is something older, waiting in the pipes, in the engine, in the very metal of the ship. I do not answer, I cannot. I feed. The smell of the melting flesh sticks to me. It seeps into my skin, my lungs, my thoughts. Each scream is a pulse of fuel, each tear a spark for the warp drive. The ship hums louder as it ingests the mass. I feel it align, my heartbeat matching its rhythm, the mechanical and the organic melding in a terrible symphony. A fragment of dialogue escapes me, unbidden, almost prayer-like. Is it alive? It must be. Everything here is alive. The engines moan, hungry and patient. I shove the last of the biomass down the intake, and the conveyor shudders as if sighing. My hands tremble, not with fear, not with guilt, but with something close to awe. The ship is a god made of iron and blood, sustained by the obedience of its slaves. We are nothing but vessels, components in its endless consumption. I step back. The hiss of boiling acid, the shriek of stretching metal, the whispering voices, all merge into one pulse. I am part of it, I am feeding it. And somewhere deep within the hull I feel it notice me, and for the briefest of moments I understand. It is watching. The pipes never stop talking. At first, it was a trick of the mind, a hiss here, a groan there, but the whispers became patterns, words, fragments of sentences. Some slaves call it the warp. Others say it's the souls we've fed to the engines. I don't know. I only know that when I pause, when I let my thoughts wander even a fraction of a second, it speaks directly to me. Turn. Listen. Obey. The words curl inside my skull like smoke. I try to ignore them, to focus on scrubbing the blood-stained vents, oiling valves, tightening the clamps. But the whispers follow, curling through the metal like roots, seeking me. Sometimes I hear my own name. Sometimes my own thoughts, twisted into commands I do not recognize as mine. I see the others glancing at the walls, speaking under their breath in syllables no human tongue should form. Their eyes shine with feverish light. One of them, a loader named Kiros, hums along to the whispers while cleaning a vent. His hands move of their own accord, carving runes into the metal with a utility knife. I touch the cold iron, the vibrations thrumming beneath my fingers. The voices respond. It is not a machine. It is aware. It hungers. It notices. I feel it learning me, testing me, seeing how far it can reach without my consent. Feed us. Become one. Serve. The words repeat over and over. I feel them in my chest, in my stomach, in the muscles that still remember what it is to be human. They make my heart race, make my skin crawl. I cannot tell if the voices are threatening or promising, condemning or liberating. And yet, in some twisted corner of my mind, a part of me wants to listen. I whisper back once, barely audible. I serve. The pipes sigh in reply. The air is thick with the smell of rust, oil, and blood. Every breath carries it deeper. Every inhalation binds me tighter to the ship. The mechanical pulse, once comforting in its consistency, now feels like a heartbeat that isn't mine. A heartbeat that can swallow me if I falter. Some nights, when the corridors are empty and the engine's quiet enough to hear yourself think, the voices are clearer. They speak of other worlds, of other ships, of carnage and worship beyond comprehension. They speak of freedom, of transformation, of the end of pain. They speak of the circle, and I wonder, maybe they are right. I cannot stop thinking of it, cannot stop feeling their pull. I touch the pipe again, tracing the cold curves with my fingertips, and the whispers rush in like water. You are ours. You belong. You are nothing without us. And in the echo, I feel something break, not a bone, not a limb, but the fragile barrier between obedience and desire, between survival and surrender. The ship is learning me, and perhaps in some terrible way, I am beginning to answer. The announcement came through the vox horns like the voice of a god choked by static. By decree of the masters of flesh, the feast begins at cycle's end. All indentured are to report for offering. No one spoke after that. You could feel it move through the ship, the word offering, a vibration that made the metal sweat. The air turned heavier, denser, like the ship itself held its breath. The older slaves didn't look up. They just slowed their movements, resigned. The newer ones panicked, asking what it meant. We didn't answer. You never answer, because the truth is worse than the silence. When the cycle ended, klaxons began to scream. The corridors glowed with a deep red light that pulsed like blood through veins. We were herded down the main artery, hundreds of us, stumbling, silent except for the chains and the sound of our breath. The ship trembled beneath our feet, the engines roaring louder than ever, as if they too hungered. We reached the offering chamber. It wasn't a hall, it was a maw. A cathedral of steel and rot, where rust formed in the shape of symbols older than any empire. The air burned in the lungs. The floor was slick with oil and something thicker. Above us, the pipes and flesh tubes dripped with slow rhythm, like a heart beating in the dark. And at the center, our masters. They were once human, maybe. Now they were something else. Flesh sculpted by madness and devotion. Armor fused to muscle, eyes glowing from where skin no longer held shape. They spoke without words, their voices transmitted directly into the mind, bypassing the mercy of ears. The ship feeds. You will serve. You will become. Then the ritual began. The chosen ones were dragged forward. Those who had grown weak, those who whispered too much, those who prayed for release. The masters chanted, and the ship joined in. The walls pulsed, veins swelling, light flickering as though the metal itself was alive. The screams came next, sharp, human at first, then distorted, like a signal tearing through frequencies. One by one, they disappeared into the engine altar, absorbed, consumed, or transformed. None returned. The stench of burning flesh filled the air, mixed with incense made from ground bone and oil. The rest of us knelt in silence, faces pressed to the cold floor, eyes closed. To look was to invite madness. I kept my head down, reciting the words the overseers had beaten into us since capture. I serve the ship. I feed the gods. I am part of the chain. When it was over, the masters left. The lights dimmed. The floor was slick with what remained of the offerings. The slaves around me wept, but quietly, never loud enough for the ship to hear. And then I felt it. A drop of something warm hit my neck. I looked up. From the ceiling above, where the pipes converged, a single black tear fell. Thick, glistening, alive. It struck my skin and sizzled like acid. But beneath the pain, there was a pulse. A heartbeat that matched my own. It was the ship, marking me. And in that moment I realized something terrible. The offering never ends. The ship is always eating, and now it knows my name. That night, if you could call any time night aboard this vessel of eternal red glow, I didn't sleep. None of us truly slept. We just paused. When the screams faded and the lights returned to their steady, breathing rhythm, I lay on the cold deck and stared at the ceiling. The pipes above me flexed, exhaling steam that smelled faintly of copper and decay. Somewhere deep within, the engines throbbed, a pulse older than thought, beating through metal like a second heart. And then, I remembered sunlight, not the glow of plasma coils or the burning luminescence of warp light, but sunlight, warm, real, the kind that kisses skin instead of flaying it. It came to me uninvited, like a dream smuggled through the cracks of reality. I saw a field, yellow grass swaying under a blue sky. Someone was laughing, soft, distant, impossible. A woman maybe, or a child. Their voice echoed through my skull like an echo from another life. But it hurt. The memory wasn't clean. It stung like holding a shard of something sacred in bloodied hands. I pressed my palms to my temples, trying to hold it there before it could dissolve into the noise. The others noticed. A man beside me, thin, eyes hollow, teeth cracked, whispered, "Don't fight it. The ship hates it when you remember." He was right. The walls groaned, slow and angry, like a beast stirring from slumber. I could feel it inside the metal, the awareness, the jealous hunger. It didn't like the intrusion of something pure. The memory slipped again. The sky dimmed. The laughter broke apart into static. The warmth curdled into the ship's heat, foul and heavy. When I opened my eyes, the field was gone. Only the pipes remained, dripping their endless oil tears. I whispered to myself just to taste the words. Was I ever human? The ship answered with a low vibration that rolled beneath me, through me. My bones rattled. My teeth ached. No, it wasn't a word. It was a feeling. A denial that pulsed through every metal nerve of the vessel. The man next to me smiled, broken and empty. See? It tells the truth. You're part of it now. He turned over and slept, or pretended to. But I couldn't. Because somewhere, deep in that fading fragment of memory, I had seen something the ship couldn't erase. A hand reaching for mine, soft and warm, and though I didn't remember her face, or her name, or even whether she was real, I remembered the touch, and for the first time since my capture, I felt something the ship could not feed on. Hope. It was small, trembling, foolish, but it was mine. The first sign wasn't sound. It was silence. The engines stopped their heartbeat. The pipes ceased their whispering. Even the constant hum that lived in the walls, the background breath of the ship, fell still. For the first time since my enslavement, there was quiet. We all froze, uncertain if this was deliverance or damnation. Then, the lights began to flicker. Not the normal, sickly pulse of malfunctioning lumen strips, but wild, spasmodic flashes that carved the corridors into fragments of light and shadow. Shapes seemed to move in between the flickers, faces, limbs, memories, all caught in a stuttering rhythm. Someone screamed. I looked up just in time to see the ceiling split open. Not like metal tearing, but like flesh rupturing. Cables spilled down, dripping ichor and static. A smell like burning hair and ozone filled the air. The ship was entering the warp. Reality convulsed. The corridors stretched and shrank. The floor turned liquid, and the walls began to breathe again. But this time they screamed. Not a sound of pain, but of joy. A deep, ecstatic wail that vibrated the marrow. I clung to the railing, but it pulsed under my fingers like a living vein. The metal was warm. All around me the slaves convulsed. Some cried prayers to gods long dead. Others laughed. One man tried to claw his eyes out, shrieking that he could see the colors talking. And I saw them too. The warp wasn't light. It wasn't darkness. It was something else. An ocean of thoughts bleeding into form, a storm of meaning without words. The space beyond the hull bled in. Shadows rippled across the decks, bending at impossible angles. The smell of iron turned to incense. My lungs filled with whispers. A voice, not human, not demon, but massive, rolled through the hull. The flesh remembers. The walls twisted in answer. The ship's structure groaned as something ancient within it awoke. A Chaos Marine strode past, his armor bleeding symbols, his helmet filled with fire. I watched him chant into the storm, his words drowned in the warp's static. His shadow stretched and split into three, each moving on its own. Gravity failed. I floated for a heartbeat, staring at the others as they rose around me, limbs flailing, mouths open in silent panic. Some collided with the ceiling and broke apart. Blood floated in perfect orbs, glowing faintly with warp light. Then gravity reversed. Bodies fell upward, slamming into the decks above. I heard bones snap like twigs. I landed hard, vision flashing white. Through the chaos, I saw something impossible. The ship's bulkheads breathing in rhythm with the storm outside. Every pulse matched the beat of my heart. And then I realized it wasn't my heart anymore. It was the ship's. We were synchronized. Slave, metal, demon, machine. Bound by the same rhythm. Outside, the warp howled. Inside, we howled back. Someone shouted a prayer to Korn. Another begged Nurgle for mercy. The air shimmered, thick with madness and devotion. I curled against the deck, whispering words that weren't mine, and waited for reality to decide what shape to wear next. Time dissolved. Minutes, hours, meaningless. I think I died and then lived again, over and over. Each time the ship stitched me back together, slightly wrong. When the lights steadied at last, the silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was listening. When the warp finally released us, it did not leave quietly. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was aftermath, like the hush after a scream too long, too loud. The corridors lay shrouded in vapor, every surface slick with condensation and something thicker than water. The air had weight, as if gravity had decided to cling to our lungs out of spite. We staggered from our corners and crawl spaces, the surviving slaves, blinking through the dim red haze. The lumen strips flickered but did not recover their rhythm. They pulsed instead, slow, uneven, like a heartbeat dying by inches. That's when I saw the first one, a woman, if the word still meant anything, crawling across the deck, her back bubbling. Flesh moved under skin like worms under wet soil. She screamed once, a sound that came from both her mouth and her spine. Her shoulders split open, birthing an arm, small, malformed, twitching. Someone whispered. The warp marked her. I didn't move to help. None of us did. We just watched, the way one might watch a fire consuming something already ruined. Then the others began to change. A man's jaw slid sideways and split in two. Another's eyes melted into black pits that oozed smoke. One of the youngest slaves, barely more than a child, grew a crown of bone from his skull. He stared at me and smiled with too many teeth. The ship groaned, deep and slow, like satisfaction. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, not from fear but from rhythm, a twitch that wasn't entirely mine. My fingers spasmed, curling and uncurling on their own. Beneath the skin, something pulsed. I pressed my palm to the wall. The metal throbbed back. In that moment, I couldn't tell where I ended and it began. The overseers didn't come for hours. When they did, they moved among us like carrion birds, marking the changed ones for collection. Those who had grown new limbs or faces were dragged away to the flesh forges. Their screams echoed until the sound became familiar, almost comforting. The overseer passed me by. His mechanical eye scanned my face, his nostrils flaring. For a second I thought he'd noticed the tremor in my hand, but he only grinned, a dry, rusted sound, and said, "You're half ready. Keep working." Then he was gone. I sat there for a long time, staring at my hand. The tremor didn't stop. It grew. Every heartbeat sent a pulse of alien warmth up my arm. I thought about cutting it off. But what if the arm grew back? What if the part I cut away lived and came looking for me? The ship hummed softly like it was laughing to itself. Later, when I tried to sleep, I dreamed of the flesh forges, great engines fed with bodies, sculpting something beautiful out of agony. When I woke, the dream was still happening, because my fingers were moving again, not to the rhythm of my thoughts, but to the rhythm of the ship's, and I realized it wasn't infection. It wasn't mutation. It was assimilation. The ship wasn't changing us. It was remembering us, rebuilding us in its image. The maintenance corridor was my sanctuary, or what passed for one aboard a ship that had already consumed my soul. The lights were dim, red, barely enough to illuminate the pulsing conduits and wet floors. The smell of burned flesh and ozone lingered, refusing to leave. My hands, still twitching unnaturally, hovered over the Vox recorder I had scavenged from a forgotten locker. I whispered into it, careful to keep my voice low, like a sinner praying in a cathedral of doom. If anyone, anything, hears this, know that I am still here, or I was. The words sounded absurd, but the act of speaking them, of creating confession, was a tether to what little humanity I had left. The recorder whirred faintly, mechanical and imperfect, like a small heart beating in the dark. I tried to focus on memories, but they were fractured, jagged pieces that refused to fit together. My mother's laughter, the sun on my face, the smell of bread baking somewhere long ago, all felt alien now, as though someone had grafted them onto a stranger's mind. Yet the confession was my only anchor, my only way of proving that I had once been human, even if just a shadow. Around me the ship groaned, a low, wet pulse echoing through the decks. I imagined it listening. Perhaps it was. Perhaps every whispered word, every tremor of my hand, every heartbeat fed into its memory, its dreams, its hunger. Maybe the ship is listening, I muttered, half to myself, half in hope that someone, or something, was. The corridors felt alive. Shadows stretched and shifted with intention. The walls seemed to breathe, exhaling a stale mixture of warp taint and death. I pressed myself against the cold metal, trying to disappear, trying to make myself a whisper among whispers. I spoke again, detailing the horrors I had witnessed, the feasts, the mutations, the endless grind. Names were unnecessary. They had been burned away with my individuality. Each confession was a thread stitched into a tapestry of despair and survival. And yet, even as I recorded, I could feel the ship's pulse within me. The tremor in my hand, the twitch in my cheek, the almost imperceptible hum in my chest. It was as if I were already half of something larger, already woven into the machinery of horror. I confess, not to you, God, not to anyone, but to the metal and the flesh, to the heartbeat beneath my feet, that I survive, that I am. The words ended in silence, but the silence was not quiet. It carried the echoes of the engines, the whispers in the pipes, the laughter of the Chaos Marines, and the faint sigh of the ship itself. It was a confession answered by nothing and everything. I shut off the recorder. My eyes, adjusting to the dim red glow, caught sight of a stain, dark, viscous, spreading across the deck. Not fresh, not old, just existing. The ship's memory, the ship's hunger, manifesting under my feet. I realized then that confession here was futile, but it was all I had. I was alone. And yet I was being listened to. It began as a sound too strange to belong here, too bright, too human. Laughter, Not the laughter of joy or camaraderie or even madness. This was something else entirely. Guttural, full-bodied, a grotesque parody of delight that echoed through the corridors like a weapon. I followed the noise, drawn as if by instinct. Down the blood-slick stairwells, past the dripping conduits, through the reeking tunnels where the air itself trembled with heat and rot. The smell was unbearable. Scorched meat, oil, warp fire. The kind of scent that clings to your soul long after you've left the place it came from. When I reached the loading chamber, I saw them. The Chaos Marines, giants in corroded armor, their surfaces glistening with ichor, their voices amplified by vox grills that distorted every syllable into a growl. They were laughing while slaughtering the mutants. The mutants screamed, but it didn't matter. It never mattered. They were the malformed results of the last warp storm. Half human, half ship, crawling on limbs that pulsed with veins of copper and bone. The Marines shot them for sport, their bolters barking like thunder. Each shot tore apart flesh and metal alike, painting the walls with a collage of red and black. And through it all, that laughter, rolling, unstoppable, joyous. "You hear that?" one of the slaves beside me whispered. His voice was trembling. "They enjoy it." I didn't respond. Because the truth hit me then. Yes, they did enjoy it. They reveled in it, found something sacred in the destruction. Their laughter wasn't cruelty. It was worship. One of the Marines kicked aside a writhing mutant and looked down at us, the line of slaves standing frozen, afraid to breathe. His helmet turned slightly, lenses glowing crimson through the haze. He said nothing, just tilted his head and laughed again. The sound went through me like an electric current. My knees weakened. Something in that laughter bypassed fear entirely. It reached a deeper part of me. The part that was hollow. The part that longed to feel anything. They laughed because they were free. Free from the weight of morality, from the burden of purpose, from the illusion of peace. Their joy was pure, unchained by the laws that crushed the rest of us. For the first time since I was enslaved, I envied them. To laugh like that, I murmured under my breath, without shame, without memory. I could almost taste the feeling, that twisted liberation hidden inside their brutality. The sound filled the chamber until it merged with the hum of the ship's heart, until I could no longer tell whether the laughter came from the Marines or from the walls themselves. It echoed long after the mutants stopped screaming. It echoed as they walked away, dragging the bodies, still chuckling through their vox grills. And it lingered when I was alone again, a phantom sound vibrating inside my skull. Later, when I returned to my station, the laughter still haunted me. When I closed my eyes, I could hear it playing over and over, warped, beautiful, obscene, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and exhaustion, something inside me started to understand it. Something inside me wanted to join in. The idea of revolt began quietly, whispered between shadows. Small movements, tentative gestures, a finger pointing at a lock, a nod toward an unsecured hatch, a glance that lasted too long to be coincidence. The slaves began to murmur in secret. Names were exchanged. Plans hatched. Courage flickered like a dying candle in the corners of the ship. I watched from the edges, too wary to join, too broken to feel hope. My hands, once skilled at precise labor, now shook at the thought of defiance. Yet the glimmer of possibility stirred a long-forgotten sense of self. "We can end this," one of them whispered to another. "Just one strike, and the ship trembles." The audacity of their words was intoxicating. For a moment, the chain of routine felt breakable. Perhaps the Chaos Marines, intoxicated by their own cruelty, could be outmaneuvered. Perhaps we, the enslaved, could reclaim a fragment of agency. Plans formed in the dim recesses of the maintenance corridors. Hidden caches of sharpened tools, broken Vox units rigged to create distractions, barrels of waste chemicals that could burn more than floors. Every item was repurposed, survival born from improvisation, and yet the rebellion never matured. The first strike came too early, poorly coordinated. A small team attempted to disable a shuttle bay. They were torn apart by the ship itself, tendrils of living metal slithering from the bulkheads, wrapping, constricting, consuming. The screams were brief, not mercifully but efficiently, as the ship fed on their courage. I watched, frozen in horror, as bodies were ripped apart and fused with machinery. I saw their terror dissolve into the hum of the engines. No rescue, no intervention, no solidarity. Just the inevitability of the ship reclaiming what dared oppose it. Courage is a luxury of those not yet broken, I muttered under my breath, tasting the bitter truth of survival. And so the lesson was reinforced. Resistance was optional only until the ship decided otherwise. The rebellion that had dared to exist became a memory before it had a chance to breathe. Every surviving slave recoiled back into routine, their hope shattered like glass under boot heels. The machinery resumed its rhythm, indifferent. Blood continued to drip, steam hissed from overheated pipes, and the muted screams of previous failures were swallowed by the omnipresent hum of the warp drive. I returned to my station, hands steady once more. My body obeyed, my mind numbed. Observation replaced action. I counted the screams and the chains and the metallic taste of fear. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet in the deepest recess of my mind, a question lingered. Not hope, not desire, merely acknowledgement. If we could rise, would the ship allow us to fall? No answer came. Only the hum of machinery, the whisper of vents, the faint echo of laughter still ringing in my skull from the Chaos Marines. The rebellion had never been meant to succeed. It existed only to remind us how thoroughly we were broken. It took me weeks, maybe months, time loses meaning here, to realize that the ship itself was alive, but not in any way that human senses could grasp. Not the conscious awareness of a mind, not the deliberate scheming of a predator, not the logic of a warlord. No, it was a dreaming. A vast, terrible dreaming, fed by the suffering it forced upon us, sustained by the endless screams, the ceaseless labor, the very flesh we processed into its engines. Every death, every twisted limb, every broken scream added to the pulse. Each moment of obedience became a heartbeat. Every act of defiance, even the failed rebellion, was folded into its subconscious, a lesson, a rhythm, a whisper in the dream. I understood then that we were not slaves in the traditional sense. We were neurons, synapses, synaptic pathways in its ever-expanding, ever-shifting mind. The machinery around me seemed alive in new ways. I could feel the hum of the warp engines resonate through my bones. Pipes throbbed with the pulse of something not mechanical, not entirely flesh. Grates quivered as if breathing, hissing steam like exhalations. Every drop of blood, every shudder of muscle, every whispered plea became threads woven into the ship's consciousness. At night, or what I recognized as night, the dreams came to me directly. I would awaken on the deck or sometimes in the vents, to visions I could not unsee, corridors bending impossibly, stairways folding into themselves, ceilings dripping with shadows that looked like faces I had known, bodies I had processed, eyes staring back at me from impossible angles, and always the sense of being watched by the heartbeat of the vessel itself, that slow, deliberate awareness that was not sight but perception of suffering. I began to notice patterns in the machinery. The engine's vibrations echoed chants, not words I could speak, but tones that resonated with something deep in my mind. Pipes sang in intervals, ducts hissed in dissonance, and somewhere beneath the decks the thrum of a heart. I thought of it as the machine's dream, a vast, subconscious reflection of the endless torment we endured. It dreams because we scream, I whispered to no one. It remembers because we cannot forget. The realization was horrifying and liberating at once. There was no master above the ship, no single demon in control. The vessel itself was the arbiter of fate, the collector of agony, the crucible in which all our failures, hopes, and fears were burned into its being. I began to understand the rhythm of the dream. There were spikes of horror, moments when walls screamed, when floors buckled, when tendrils reached from machinery to claim the broken or rebellious. There were lulls, brief, terrible calm where the weight of inevitability pressed down on us, and we labored in silence, waiting, listening, trembling. Sometimes in those lulls I could sense the machine reaching through us. Its perception filtered through the bodies of slaves. A hand trembled where it should not, a voice quivered when chanting, a foot faltered in step. I felt it through me, a faint echo of intention, a pulse of hunger that was both our own and impossibly alien. I thought of the rebellion that never was. The bodies consumed and understood. The machine had learned. Every action, every thought, every scream, every flicker of resistance became part of its dreaming. And in its dreaming, it grew stronger. I shivered, though the decks were perpetually cold, and realized that submission was survival, and survival was participation. To live was to feed its dreams, to work, to process, to scream, to die, all threads in the machine's tapestry of horror. We are its mind, and it is our nightmare, I said aloud, my voice swallowed by the hum of the engines, and I knew, even as my body moved mechanically through another shift, another feeding, another scream, that nothing here was accidental. Every sound, every vibration, every drop of blood was its language, and we had become fluent. The whispers started subtly at first, a shiver along the conduits, a faint resonance through the metal grates. I had learned to ignore the minor tremors, the half-heard words, the soft sighs from the vents. But now they sharpened, threading themselves through every corridor, every deck, every shadow. They were no longer background. They had intention, cadence, and patience. I paused at a junction, the steel beneath my boots humming with the ship's dream. The whisper came again, clearer this time, and I understood. It was addressing me, not through speech, not through vibration, not through sight, but through recognition. It knew my weight, my breathing, my hesitation. It had always known, but now it chose to reach. "You hear me?" it said. The words weren't sound. They were comprehension, slanting into my mind with a subtle insistence. "You are more than what you serve. You can be beyond the circuits, beyond the scream, beyond the grind." I froze, the impulse to flee warring with the dread of listening. I had been alive in the ship for years, and I knew better than to trust any voice promising freedom. But the pull was magnetic, drawn from some void deeper than the engines, darker than the blood-filled ducts, hungrier than the chaos marines who patrolled above. The walls themselves seemed to pulse. Rivets and conduits twisted as if breathing. Steam hissed from broken pipes in rhythms I could not mimic. Shadows leaned toward me, black angles that should not exist. The voice was patient. "All that you have suffered, all that you have processed, all that you have been, it has meaning. Open your mind and I will give you direction. You can act. You can shape. You can serve more than the machine." I wanted to argue, to resist, to retreat into the mechanical obedience that had preserved me for so long. But the more I resisted, the louder it became, threading its suggestions through the rhythm of my heartbeat, embedding itself in my thoughts. Even my memories, fragments of light, family, laughter, became vessels to carry its promises, turning nostalgia into temptation. It was seductive and terrifying. It did not command outright. It offered choice, and in a place where choice had been extinguished for so long, the illusion of control was both intoxicating and abhorrent. "They fear you will see," the voice continued. "The masters of bone and iron, the overseers of flesh, the enforcers of the guild, they cannot understand what we offer. They cannot perceive what has been growing beneath their commands. We are older than them, hungrier than them, patient beyond their fear." I felt the walls close slightly, or perhaps it was my mind compressing under attention. Every rusted panel, every grate, every seam became a conduit for intent. The whispers were coherent now, chanting phrases that did not exist in any tongue I knew, yet each syllable felt inevitable, almost logical. They promised power, clarity, release, but at what cost? "Listen, act, transcend," it said. "The path is clear. The lower sanctum awaits. You know the locks, you know the keys. You are ready." I shivered, half in anticipation, half in dread. The voice had chosen me, or perhaps I had always been listening. In the corridors of the ship, amidst the endless hum of engines and the cries of the damned, I realized that obedience, survival, and madness had become inseparable. "I hear you," I whispered into the metal, unsure if I meant it or merely acknowledged inevitability. The ship continued to dream, and now, so did I, guided, nudged, corrupted by a voice that promised a task, a purpose, a liberation that might be death itself. The deck plates convulsed beneath my feet. The sound was not of metal but of sinew stretching, tendons snapping, a heartbeat sinking to the rhythm of the warp. The sanctum's pit flared open, vomiting light that wasn't light, colors that seared the mind, hues that screamed. The walls began to breathe. The ribs of the ship flexed inward, as if exhaling centuries of pain. Every whisper I had ever heard, every moan in the pipes, every prayer murmured by dying throats, rose into a single note of unbearable resonance. It was not a sound meant for human understanding. It was a birth cry. I stumbled backward as the pit erupted. Flesh and metal entwined, forming towers of bone wrapped in veins of molten iron. Out of this storm rose a silhouette, vast, formless, writhing with faces that appeared and vanished like bubbles in blood. It was a demon, or perhaps the ship itself, shedding pretense. Its body was both corridor and creature, both prison and priest. Thousands of eyes blinked open across its surface, each one showing a different memory, fragments of the lives it had consumed. I saw my own face among them, distorted, screaming silently. The Chaos Marines arrived then, drawn by the awakening. They did not fight. They knelt. Their armor hissed with heat as they pressed their heads to the floor, chanting words older than language. The heart of hunger, the womb of the machine, the god that eats itself. The demon's laughter shook the air, not amusement but recognition. It saw them, its faithful, and spread its limbs like wings made of broken spines. Every cable in the ship twitched. The engines howled in ecstasy. The warp flames outside the hull turned crimson, and then it spoke, not through words but through understanding. A message burned itself into my mind. You built me from your pain. You worshipped me through obedience. I am the shape of your surrender. The Marines' chanting grew frantic, euphoric. Some tore off their helmets, pressing their foreheads against the pulsating floor until their skulls cracked. Others laughed until their throats tore open. The slaves who remained alive crawled closer to the pit, eyes wide with madness or revelation. The demon rose higher, its spine scraping the sanctum's ceiling, splitting it apart. It didn't stop. It broke through deck after deck, ascending toward the upper levels, toward the shrieking void beyond. Each movement shattered bulkheads, released gouts of steam and blood. I could feel the ship's systems collapsing. The air turned to poison. Gravity twisted, reversed, pulsed like a heartbeat gone wild. Still I couldn't move. My knees refused to bend, my eyes refused to close. "Do you see now?" It whispered within me. "You were never a prisoner. You were the key," and I understood. Every lash, every command, every prayer had been part of this. Every act of cruelty was devotion. Every death was an offering. We hadn't been enslaved. We had been gestating something divine in its own rot. The demon burst through the ceiling and into the void. The warp itself seemed to bow before it, storms bending, stars dissolving into rivers of fire. The last thing I saw before the sanctum collapsed was the overseer's broken body being lifted by tendrils of flesh, offered like a chalice to the newborn god. The demon's mouth opened wide enough to swallow suns, and it sang. The song was beautiful, terrifying, infinite, and then the ship screamed, "Are a living cathedral, giving birth to its own annihilation." Ship had no shape anymore. It was a storm of flesh and faith, an organism rewriting itself faster than reality could adapt. The walls melted into rivers of blood that flowed upward, then sideways, then into themselves again. The corridors twisted like intestines, pulsing to the rhythm of a god's heartbeat. The demon fed. It began with the Marines, its own worshippers. They reached for it, chanting as it descended upon them, its mouths opening like petals of hunger. Their armor melted, their flesh fused with the ship's surface. They screamed praises even as their lungs were devoured. "Consume us," one shouted. "Remember us," said another. Their words dissolved into gurgles as they were absorbed, not killed, but transformed. Their essence joined the demon's pulse, their consciousnesses echoing faintly within the living walls. The slaves tried to flee, but there was nowhere left to go. The corridors had closed. The ship had become one massive digestive tract. Those who ran found themselves back where they started, their footprints already erased by the tide of gore. I watched one woman claw at the bulkhead, only for the metal to open like a wound and swallow her hand. She didn't even scream, just stared in disbelief as her body was pulled in piece by piece. Her last words were a whisper. "I'm sorry." Then she was gone. The air became thick with vaporized blood and ozone. The deck plates liquefied into translucent tissue that pulsed beneath my feet. Every vibration carried a voice. Fragments of those consumed, murmuring prayers, apologies, laughter. I staggered through it all, searching for something human. A space, a thought, a silence. But there was nothing. Even silence had a pulse now. The demon loomed above, a shifting constellation of organs and machinery. Its face was a storm of eyes, and within one of them I saw myself, small, trembling, irrelevant. Yet the gaze that met mine was almost gentle. "You have served well," it said within my mind. "You carried the seed through fear and obedience. You birthed me." I fell to my knees, not out of worship, but exhaustion. "Why?" I whispered. "Why create something that only consumes?" It smiled, or something close to it, because consumption is the only truth. Creation feeds decay. Decay feeds rebirth. You call it horror. I call it equilibrium. The ship shuddered again, expanding outward like a lung drawing its final breath. The demon's tendrils wrapped around everything. Pipes, altars, corpses, drawing them into itself. And then, without warning, one tendril reached for me. It didn't seize or strike. It touched. The sensation was indescribable, like drowning in memories that weren't mine. I felt every life the ship had taken, soldiers, slaves, priests, machines. Their emotions rushed through me, terror, ecstasy, despair, peace, until I couldn't tell which belonged to me anymore. "Join me," it whispered. "The cycle completes with you." I wanted to resist. I wanted to remember who I was. But the truth was I no longer was. I had given away everything, memories, name, self, long before this moment. The tendril enveloped me, and I felt my skin dissolve, my bones melt into light. There was no pain, only release, a warmth like surrender, like finally exhaling after holding one's breath for eternity. In that final instant, before my thoughts became one with the ship, I understood. Freedom had never been the opposite of servitude. It had always been its purest form. To dissolve was to be unbound. To be consumed was to belong. And as the demon devoured the last remnants of the crew, I felt peace. I was never free, I whispered, until I was eaten. The ship screamed once more, a note so high and vast it tore through the warp. And then everything went silent. Silence. Not the mechanical quiet of a shutdown engine, not the heavy pause before another round of screams, but a silence that breathed. A silence so vast it felt alive, stretching across every corridor, every hall, every vein of the ship. The demon was gone, or sleeping, or perhaps it had become the ship entirely. The walls still pulsed faintly, but slower now, like a heartbeat after death, echoing through something that had forgotten to stop. I woke in what used to be the sanctum, or the feeding pit, or maybe both. The floor was soft like flesh gone cold. The light came from nowhere, a dim amber glow that shifted as though the air itself were dreaming. Around me there were others, or what was left of them. Shapes that once were human, now twisted into still forms. Some had merged with the walls. Others lay half-absorbed, eyes open, mouths moving soundlessly. A few still breathed, though none spoke. Their chests rose and fell like broken bellows, their skin translucent and webbed with faint crimson veins that pulsed to the ship's rhythm. We were the leftovers. No overseers. No Marines. No chants or quotas. No orders, no purpose. For the first time since my enslavement, no one told me what to do. It should have felt like freedom. It didn't. Freedom requires memory, and I had none worth keeping. Even my own name slipped away, as if it were being digested from within. I remembered the work, the rituals, the sound of the saws, but nothing before. The demon had eaten that too. I wandered through corridors that folded into themselves, past altars made of bone and melted steel, past faces fused into bulkheads, their eyes dull but still wet with tears that would never dry. The air was heavy with copper and incense. I could taste both with every breath. In one chamber I found what might have been a window once, now just a membrane that pulsed faintly against the void. Outside the warp churned, colors too wrong to name, shapes that moved but didn't exist. It looked almost peaceful, like a storm viewed from beneath an ocean. I stayed there for a long time, just watching, listening to the hum beneath my feet, the heartbeat of the demon, of the ship, of myself. They were one now. There was no escaping that. At some point I realized my reflection was gone. The surface no longer showed me, only the faint ripple of blood when I moved. I thought I heard a voice then, soft, distant, familiar. It wasn't the demon. It wasn't a Marine. It was something smaller, quieter. "Keep working," it said. The words came like memory, faint but insistent. Keep serving. It wasn't a command. It was a habit. So I kept moving, as if some part of me still believed there was work to do. As if the cycle demanded motion even when there was no function left to perform. The ship drifted endlessly, its engines cold, its lights dim. The demon slept within its bowels, dreaming of the next harvest. The survivors wandered its halls like ghosts. We did not eat. We did not speak. We simply existed, half-living remnants of a hunger too vast to die. In time, even thought began to fade. All that remained was the sound, faint, steady, infinite, of the ship breathing through us. The circle was still turning. There is a chamber deep within the ship that was once used for cleansing. I remember it faintly. We would wash the blood from our hands there after feeding the engines. Now it is something else entirely. The walls sag like skin deprived of bone. The floor ripples beneath my steps. Every motion sends soft echoes through the liquid pooled there. It isn't water. It's thicker, darker, the color of oxidized iron and ruin. The air above it is heavy with metallic steam, so dense I can taste it before I breathe it. The liquid mirrors light in strange ways. The reflections shift even when nothing moves. I kneel beside it, drawn without thought. I tell myself I only want to see if I'm still human. I already know the answer. At first, there's nothing. Just the oily swirl of the surface. Then the light bends, and a face looks back at me. It smiles. I don't. The face is mine and not mine. The skin moves too slowly, as though it's thinking about each motion before committing to it. Eyes darker than they should be, edges of the mouth sharp and wet. Veins crawl across my reflection like a map of some diseased star system. When I blink, it doesn't. When I breathe, it inhales after. I whisper my name, or what I think it was, and the reflection laughs, soft and patient. The sound doesn't come from the pool. It comes from inside me. Something beneath my skin stirs in response. A faint crawling sensation moves up my arm. I roll up the sleeve, and the flesh underneath is no longer just flesh. It's threaded with something black and pulsing. Something that moves to the same rhythm as the ship's heartbeat. The realization settles with strange calm. The ship isn't just outside me anymore. It's in me, through me. I carry a piece of it, or it carries me. The distinction doesn't matter. I dip my hand into the liquid. The surface breaks soundlessly, like skin splitting under pressure. It's warm, disturbingly warm, and it clings to my fingers like it's alive. When I pull back, my reflection doesn't reform right away. It struggles, like something trapped beneath trying to remember what shape it's supposed to take. For a moment, I think I see the demon's face, immense, incomprehensible, smiling through mine. But then it's gone. The pool settles. The reflection stares back again, calm, confident, certain. I speak to it. What am I now? It doesn't answer. It doesn't need to. The silence between us says enough. Behind me the ship groans. Not a structural sound, a voice. It whispers low, too deep to be heard, too familiar to ignore. The same tone that once came from the overseer, from the demon, from my own thoughts. I turn to leave, but the reflection keeps moving even after I've stood. It watches me with a patience that feels eternal. As I walk away, I hear the faint echo of my own voice, except it isn't echoing. It's coming from behind, from the reflection still whispering at the pool. You are part of the ship, it says. And the ship never ends. I don't look back. I don't need to. The truth has already been absorbed into me, blood deep. I can feel the ship's veins inside mine, the hum of the engines in my heartbeat, the echo of the demon in my breath. The reflection was right. The ship is me now, and I am what remains of it. There is no sunrise here. There never was. Only the shifting pulse of red emergency lights that have burned for centuries. Or hours. I can't tell anymore. The ship drifts through the void like a carcass afloat on a black sea. Every sound it makes, the groan of stressed metal, the hiss of leaking air, the distant heartbeat of its engines, feels like the sigh of something too vast and too tired to die. Once I thought we had a destination. A system, a planet, a hope. Now I know better. There is no course plotted. There hasn't been for a long time. The ship moves because it must. Because motion is the only thing left keeping it alive. I wander through the endless corridors. The markings on the walls have changed. Or maybe I have. The symbols pulse faintly, like veins under skin. They hum when I pass. They know me. In the great observation chamber, the glass is cracked, but it still holds. Beyond it stretches infinity. Black void streaked with faint, bleeding colors from distant nebulae. For the first time in what feels like ages, I see something beautiful. Not human beautiful. Not divine. Something older. A raw beauty born of emptiness and survival. The stars look close enough to touch, but I know they're dead. Their light is just the echo of something long extinguished. The same could be said for me. I place a hand on the glass. It's cold, or maybe my hand is. In the reflection, I catch a glimpse of movement. Not behind me, but inside me. The demon's shadow faint now, distant. Not gone, never gone, but quiet. It speaks, but softly this time. Like a memory. You've learned what it means to endure. I don't argue. I've stopped arguing with ghosts. The ship hums in agreement. The sound resonates through the hull, a tone that vibrates in my bones, syncing with my pulse. The sensation is not pain. It's purpose. I walk the length of the deck, past shattered consoles and burnt-out terminals. Everywhere I go, the lights seem to follow, flickering in sequence, guiding me deeper. At the end of the corridor, I find a viewport sealed with thick iron shutters. A single control rune blinks weakly beside it. I touch it. The shutters shudder, then slowly peel open like eyelids after a long sleep. Outside there is nothing. No stars, no planets, no sense of direction or distance, just a single streak of white light stretching infinitely into the dark. A wound in space. A trail of something the ship left behind. It looks like a path, or maybe a scar. I hear the demon again. Do you see it now? Where it all leads? I nod, not out of obedience, out of understanding. There was never freedom, never rescue. There was only continuation. The ship will go on. It will carry what remains of us, the memories, the screams, the devotion, into places where even gods have forgotten to look. It will never stop, because the act of stopping would mean death. And death in this place is not release, it's rebirth. I step away from the viewport. My reflection follows again, obedient now, unified. The same voice speaks through both of us, low and final. The voyage never ends. The corridor behind me brightens. A new hum, a new awakening. Something stirs within the ship's heart. Deep in the engine core, the machine is alive again. It remembers its purpose, and so do I. I turn toward the sound, walking with steady steps. No hesitation, no fear. Whatever lies ahead, the stars, the void, the demon, it's all the same now. It's all part of the endless voyage. There is a sound that never leaves the mind, a whisper, thin as air, carried through steel and blood alike, even now. As I sit beside the silent reactor in the rhythm of my heart, I can still hear it in the pulse of the metal. It's not the hum of the engines or the sigh of air systems struggling to breathe. Light. It's the voice of the ship itself. Once I resisted those words. I clung to my name, my memories, my humanity. Now I see how small those things were, how temporary. There is no self in the void, only persistence, only function, only the endless duty to exist, to witness, to remember, to continue. Sometimes I try to recall faces. The overseer who burned the flesh from my back, the other slaves, whose eyes dulled long before their hearts stopped, the priest of the dark gods who promised transcendence and delivered only suffering. Their voices are gone now, but their screams remain, woven into the hum of the ship, like verses in a hymn no one dares to end. When I close my eyes, I can hear them singing, 1,000 fractured prayers overlapping in chaotic harmony. It's beautiful in its own way. Terrible, but beautiful. That's the truth of the galaxy. Everything that endures does so through horror, and everything that forgets dies quietly, unmarked, The ship drifts toward a place without coordinates, a region of space unlit by any star. Perhaps it's where all things go when the gods are finished with them. Perhaps it's just the dark. Between thoughts, I no longer ask questions. Only listen. The whisper returns, softer than before, not commanding now, almost gentle. Do you understand? I whisper back, yes. The lights dim. The hum fades into silence. For a long moment, there is nothing, not even thought. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep within the structure, the engines stir again, a single heartbeat, a single pulse. The ship isn't dead. It's waiting for another soul to hear the call, waiting to teach them what it means to serve, to suffer, to endure. And when it does, the whisper will rise once more. You are part of it now. The void accepts me. The ship moves on. The stars, what few remain, flicker once. Like eyes closing, the whisper that remains is not mine. It's ours.